So, welcome everyone. We are so grateful you are here. My name is Elizabeth Johnson, and I am one of the co-founders of the organization, and I work as our executive director. And this evening's workshop, Dine with Dementia, is part of a continuing education series that we are offering as the Peaceful Presence Project. Our mission is to reimagine and transform the way that communities talk about, plan for, and experience serious and terminal illness. And so, in addition to offering end-of-life doula services, a lot of upstream advanced care planning support, another one of our main areas of focus is education, community-based education, and bringing literacy to communities around experiences of illness, of death and dying, of grief, etc. So this series is all connected to that desire to bring more kind of educational capacity and competency in communities. And so we're really grateful to have Patty joining us this evening. I'm going to hand it over to her in a moment, but just wanted to say Patty, as intro, Patty is a dementia care navigator here in Central Oregon, and has founded a company called Dementia Support Community in Bend. And through that, she provides dementia education, life enrichment activities, family consultations, and advanced care planning. And her focus is really on providing person-centered, inclusive support. And her expertise spans neuropsychology, dementia care, palliative care, and recreational therapy. And really like the fact that her work with individuals, she's worked with more than 70 families and individuals, is rooted in the Montessori care principles, which really means, it's about promoting quality of life through every stage of dementia. And so we really appreciate her willingness to spend more time really looking at this later stage of dementia as somebody goes into more of the kind of end of life window. It's not an area of education that's offered up frequently. And so we appreciate Patty's desire to educate all of us this evening. If you have questions as she's going through the content, feel free to use the chat box. If there are kind of multiple questions coming up around some section of the presentation, we'll pause and have Patty address that. So feel free to use the chat. And if you are not already on mute, we just ask that people stay on mute. Your mute should be on the far left corner, or if you hover over your picture, there's a blue box and hit mute. That'll just help with audio for everyone this evening as well. So with that, I am going to hand it over to Patty, and we are so grateful again that you are here with us. Thank you, Patty.
Based on different gems. So she calls the people at the very end of life pearls, which is a great visual image because it reminds us that we're working towards finding that treasure that's inside the hard shell. And that's the pearl. The oyster shell, if you think of where pearls are created, it's not really all that pretty on the outside. It can be really hard to open and get into the center. Takes some proper techniques and some very patient effort to get in there to find the pearl in each oyster shell. But once you break through that shell and find a way inside, you're rewarded with something very precious and beautiful, a pearl. So in end-stage dementia, that precious pearl is the person that you love, that precious, beautiful moment also of human connection that you get to share with them when you get past these symptoms that are creating that shell. Okay, and I want to talk about the long goodbye, and bear with me because I feel strongly about this. The last complication is what people call the long goodbye. I'm sure you've seen it if you've read through any literature on dementia and progression. And basically, as dementia takes over more of the brain and symptoms increase during the last stage, like I said before, it's really easy for people to start believing that person is no longer there, no longer reachable. You even sometimes hear people talk about others who have had dementia when they're talking about past family member experience. They will even use the words that the person was gone before they died. But I can tell you from my own experiences of working in memory care, this is definitely not the case. People with dementia will surprise you by showing up again and again, just every time you start to give up hope of reaching them. In fact, it's really the sudden contrast of going from the feeling of losing hope of reaching them to a surprise moment where you find that genuine, deeply emotional connection with the person that you know and love behind all of those dementia caused obstacles. And that's a huge feeling of joy. These are the moments you're going to treasure, either if you're doing it professionally as a death doula, you'll still treasure them, or as a family care partner for sure. You'll treasure these the rest of your life long after the death. So they're very much worth all the effort it takes to get to them. I want to share just one example from my experience in working in memory care. I have several I could use, but this one in particular touches my heart so much that I still often think of it and smile. One of the memory care community members that I worked with for about a year when I was working as a life enrichment coordinator was a gentleman who had Lewy body dementia. And Lewy body is a particular kind of dementia that can really impact the body more substantially than some other types. A lot of the physical symptoms that get later in the progression are very similar to Parkinson's, if you're familiar with that. So this particular gentleman, he struggled to lift his head. And he spent most of his final couple of years actually really looking down at the ground. He also had a very stiff body, struggled with walking, struggled with getting up off chairs. He also had been almost entirely nonverbal for about a year before he passed. But when I came back to visit him about a year after I left working there, and it was just, turns out, a month before he'd passed away, he held my hand. He worked very hard to lift his head and to keep it up so he could look me in the eyes. And even though he couldn't talk back to me, he intently listened to me without breaking eye contact at all as I talked to him. The other caregivers that had been working with him in recent months were really surprised and said so after I stopped interacting with him because he really just hadn't been connecting with anyone for quite a while. He'd been sort of in his own world, just following caregivers along as they would help him walk somewhere or feed him. But the moment he heard my voice, he looked up and he connected with me. And it was really a deep emotional feeling of connection. He wouldn't have known my name. He wouldn't have realized where he knew me from. But what he knew is that he cared about me and I cared about him. And he was treasuring our connection as much as I was. And here's where I have to not cry. um, but people with dementia can often retain memories that are tied to emotions more than they can remember facts. And this is true throughout the progression of dementia. If you're familiar with Maya Angelou, she has a famous quote that people may forget what you've said or done, but they'll never forget how you made them feel. This is so true for people with dementia, probably twice as true as for everybody else, because they use their feelings of trust and emotions to guide what is true around them. So this, as an aside, is why it's so important when you're working with someone with dementia to maintain a positive and kind tone, to approach carefully so that you don't startle them when you're interacting. And that's all so that they can feel your kindness and know that they trust you. They can build trust with you. So this particular man and I had built layers of positive emotional connection memories for days, day after day. I worked there full time. And we would each day walk together, talk together. We would sometimes dance together when there was a musician there. So he had an emotional memory of all that from a few years earlier when he had more abilities to interact. And while we were sitting there connecting during this last visit, other people looking at us would have just thought, oh, it's just two people sitting and talking. Pretty one-sided conversation at that. But I could feel the magic of the connection on such an emotional, deep, soul connecting level. And I know that he did too, based on his eyes. So that was a big story to tell you, just to explain the concept of that long goodbye of dementia and why it can be so misleading. It sometimes creates an obstacle between the people who are supporting the person who's dying with dementia and the person, because we make an assumption that we're not going to be able to connect with them because they're gone. We have already been saying goodbye throughout their progression. We should never say goodbye. We should just keep finding new ways of connecting them. There is some meaningful benefit to using that concept of a long goodbye. So I will cover that a little bit too. And that value of the long goodbye concept is really in supporting the care partners of this person. It's acknowledging the many types of grief that emerge at points all through the progression of dementia. And it also is important to acknowledge that there's grief for the person with dementia, not just the care partners. But grief starts for both people at diagnosis, sometimes even before diagnosis of dementia. So it can be a long time before death that they've been dealing with grief, years and years potentially. As people receive a dementia diagnosis, they and their loved ones first realize that the life they had expected and planned for in retirement is going to be very different than what they hoped for. So, first layer of grief. And at the very same time that they're realizing they have to shift their expectations for the future, they're also receiving a terminal diagnosis. And so they're realizing, coming to terms with the idea that they will die within a finite time frame. So they and their loved ones start realizing that limited time left together, and they start experiencing what's called anticipatory grief. Grief, both during the journey through all the stages of dementia and even after death, can also be very complicated for people who have gone through a dementia journey. And this is particularly for the caregiver side of it. Complicated grief can lead to a need for more support at the time of the death and after in order for that caregiver to successfully maneuver grief and kind of reintegrate into regular life. Some of the reasons that dementia particularly complicates grief are, first of all, past relationship problems. If the caregiver and the person with dementia had some unresolved relationship issues when dementia started, then the loss of their memory, loss of ability to communicate, and loss of empathy that can come with the person who has dementia can keep them from resolving those old relationship issues. And even for people that had good relationships prior to having dementia, dementia symptoms can really take a toll on their relationship over the years of caregiving. Dementia symptoms can include things like loss of inhibition, loss of using appropriate vocabulary while maybe using more cussing and inappropriate words. There's increased agitation and aggression, potentially, increased impulsivity, and a lot of disorientation, which can lead to conflict in disagreeing what's going on around them. So, all of this can build tension between the person and their caregiver, which then can take that toll on their relationship. So, by the time they're approaching death, they have that strain on their relationship potentially. And then, like I mentioned at the beginning, the stigma and loss of social support, both for the person with dementia and the caregiver, can lead to a really significant loneliness for both. And that makes it harder to deal with the grief. Caregiver might have also lost a job, lost other income, lost resources. So, as they're trying to deal with grief, they may have a lot of other worries they're dealing with that distract them from dealing with the grief. The caregiver's own mental and physical health might also have significantly declined throughout the caregiving journey. So they may have other personal struggles at the same time that the person is actually dying. And the caregiver finally may also have some feelings of guilt mixed into their grief that really complicates how they work through their grief because they're feeling potentially guilty over feeling relief from the death. Caregiving for dementia has a lot of strain. So it's natural that they're going to feel some relief that that strain is coming to an end, but it can make them feel bad that they're feeling that way. And then just the idea of grief exhaustion. The caregiver with someone with dementia may have been caregiving at different levels, but some sort of supervising, watching over the person for a period of like 4 to 10 years. And that's just kind of an average, depending on different types of dementia. But that's about how long people can experience living with all the symptoms and dealing with it day to day. So that caregiver may just really be tired of feeling grief and they may not want to deal with it at the time of the death. Or they might have been so accustomed to feeling the grief that they don't really notice that they're still dealing with grief and they may not want to address it at the moment or may not be able to. So the bottom line is the long goodbye of dementia does create obstacles in caregiving for the person nearing death with dementia, because it holds back our perceptions, makes us maybe hesitate to connect more, and then it also does complicate grief in all of those ways. Okay, so I realize I set a very bleak stage, and I apologize for all of that, but we needed to do it. So let's just pause a minute, take a breath, and we're going to shift directions. We're going to shift towards a little bit more hopeful conversation, hopefully. We're going to talk about what can we do to help overcome all of these additional challenges that dementia brings. What can we do to help people with dementia and their caregivers experience these treasured moments of meaningful connection that are going to help them both find some peace in the dying process? And I promise you that there is still hope for moments of joy, and there is hope for some peace at death despite all of these challenges. Okay, so why do we even need to make all of this effort to try and create moments of meaningful connection with someone who has dementia? Well, I just explained the first reason when talking about the long goodbye, and that is that person is still there, even if they're hard to connect with sometimes. They're behind the symptoms. So, going back to Peaceful Presence Project's statement on the website that I said I agreed with in the beginning, they are a human being. They're still there, even if we have a hard time finding them minute to minute. But they are a human being who just happens to have dementia. So, they have as much right to enjoy a compassionate end of life and death with dignity as anyone else. So that's our main reason. But there's also a lot of psychological theory that supports the reason that we're doing all of this work to connect with somebody. These theories speak to the needs that all humans share as life ends so that they can end their life well. There's no reason to believe that people with dementia don't also have these needs. Even though they might be disoriented or confused, they still feel inner feelings, and they likely still need help coming to peace with some of their feelings. So we're going to quickly go through some of these theories. I'm going to start with Erik Erikson. He has a psychosocial development theory where he frames our life journey as being a series of conflicts that we're trying to resolve at different age groups. And the conflict he says we face at the last stage of development, end of life, is the conflict between integrity and despair. Basically, if we can look back on our life and feel integrity in how we lived our life, then we will feel like we successfully met our goals, and we'll be able to escape that despair and regret that we would have if we didn't feel we lived as we should. So this helps us to accept our life, to feel complete, and to find closure so that we don't have to fear the coming of death. And that hopefully brings us to a level of acceptance and peace with our own death. I think most of us, if we think about this, this is how we feel as we go through life and as we approach death. So this is also, if you've been with somebody as they're passing, you've probably experienced that people often want to talk about their life, what was good, what was hard, the best and the worst of it as death approaches. And this is also why somebody who's dying might need to connect with certain people to feel like they come to some kind of emotional resolution. And this is all in an attempt, according to Erikson, to eliminate despair in order to find peace at the end of life. The challenge for people with dementia is that they often struggle with communication and connection. So we need to help them find their peace by reflecting aspects of their life back to them in a way that they can experience the feeling that comes from that integrity in how they lived. Another of my favorite human development theories is Abraham Maslow's self-actualization, which is a part of his hierarchy of needs, which you can see the pyramid to the right. This is part of his theory. Maslow sees the ultimate goal of our psychosocial development by end of life as self-actualization, basically fully becoming the best we can be, reaching full potential. So if you put this idea with Erik Erikson's concept of integrity, you might say that the way to find peace by realizing we achieved integrity in our life according to Erickson's theory is by feeling that we've already accomplished Maslow's self-actualization. So bear with me, it'll come together. Self-actualization is just one of those key contributors to dying in peace and knowing that we lived the best life we could. Another way of using Maslow's hierarchy of needs in supporting someone who's dying with dementia is to really focus on the pyramid concept. The pyramid illustrates his idea that the only way people can achieve self-actualization is by first meeting the lower levels of needs. Before we can work on anything else, according to Maslow, we need to meet first our basic physiological needs, which that's like hunger, sleep, pain, resolution, pain resolution and health. And then once we meet physiological needs, we can move on to safety needs, which is being safe, feeling safe, physiologically, psychologically, and sociologically, in every way, feeling safe. And then we can move on to our social needs. And once we have some take a breath. Once we have some healthy social connections, then we can move on to the next level, which are esteem needs, and build our good self-esteem. And then finally, we can go from self-esteem to self-actualization, being proud of who we've become. So sometimes people look at Maslow as making our way up this pyramid over the whole lifespan. But in your role in supporting someone who's dying, you can also look at it to evaluate whether we're meeting these hierarchy of needs every day. The more consistently we meet each of these needs every day, the more often they're going to feel self-actualized. And especially for people with dementia, since they can really only reflect on the present moment, since they have an impaired memory, repetition of that opportunity to feel the sense of self-actualization is what's going to bring the peace to them, rather than going back and analyzing what they've done in their life. So an example of how you'd apply the pyramid this way: if we care for their pain, if we care for their hunger and sleep needs, if we create a calm environment around them where they feel safe, help other people gather around to support them, and in doing all that, we meet their needs for love and belonging. And then if we also are encouraging to them, telling them, repeatedly what's so wonderful and unique about them, then we're building that self-esteem need. And then finally, they can potentially feel self-actualized when all of that feels like it's in the right place. The more often they feel that sense of self-actualization, the more often they're going to be at peace as death is approaching. But with dementia, it's just really important we keep meeting that over and over so they can experience it as continually as possible in the present moment. One more psychological theory I want to add into there, because it will help us help somebody find integrity and meet the Maslow hierarchy needs, is Carl Rogers' description of a person-centered relationship. He says we can build a supportive person-centered relationship by doing these things: by getting to know that person as a unique individual and honoring their characteristics and preferences, approaching them without judgment and with genuine empathy, and then also meeting them where they are in each moment. In the case of somebody with dementia, this also means we need to be accommodating them by adapting our interactions to compensate for the changes in their perceptions. We can do this by filling in details that they can't remember, by leading them through the process of reminiscence, by adjusting how we communicate so they can understand us, and by approaching in a way that's comfortable to them, because they're going to have a lot of changes with sensory perception also. If we can learn the skills to keep reevaluating what's working in our interactions with them while we're interacting, then we can keep adapting our approach. And the more we adapt our approach, the more often we're going to connect with them, find them where they are behind their symptoms. And all of this is going to help them find peace through feeling self-actualization. It also is going to take us into the last two concepts I have listed on this slide. The more we connect with them, and the more we support their needs, the more often we're going to feel grace moments and terminal lucidity. Grace moments is a term that I stole from a book written by a social worker, Nancy Kreisman. And she writes about grace moments in her book, which is called Meaningful Moments. And I have it listed on my slide at the end, and I'll share it in the chat at the end. These grace moments, she says, are moments of true connection with a person who was previously kind of hidden behind the dementia symptoms. And these grace moment connections pop up when you take time to focus less on doing everything around them and spend more time just being present with that person. Grace moments are moments, she says, when something ordinary becomes extraordinarily meaningful just because you're taking the time to be aware and appreciate the treasure of that moment of connection. Another concept, which might surprise you if you haven't seen or heard about it, is terminal lucidity. And terminal lucidity is similar to grace moments because it can happen when you least expect it. In the course of an ordinary day, usually terminal lucidity happens very close to death, usually in the last week before death. And it usually happens after a long period of very limited ability to function. The difference with terminal lucidity over grace moments is terminal lucidity is actually a temporary improvement in brain function, whereas grace moments are just our ability to appreciate the moment a little more. But terminal lucidity is a temporary resurgence in the brain's ability to connect with somebody else. Sometimes it's just some of the person's old personality coming through and showing itself in a way that maybe it hasn't for years. Sometimes it's a temporary ability to recall memories that seemed lost before. Sometimes it's an improved ability to just physically control the body or to speak more clearly than they have been. Sometimes it's also just an improved ability to focus on the people around them and to connect better. I have seen terminal lucidity a couple of times in memory care. It does not happen with everybody, but there's always the chance of it happening, so we should always keep watching for it. One example was a man who had mostly been bedridden. He had had a lot of trouble walking on his own for many months. And one day, out of the blue, he decided he wanted to come out of his room and he wanted to join our balloon volleyball game one day. He played so hard and very adeptly that day. It was seated, but still, it was impressive how well he was connecting with the balloon. We all enjoyed it. We were very surprised by it. He was kind of engaging with the other people as well. And fortunately, his wife happened to be visiting when it happened. So they smiled, laughed, played together with us. And then he died the next day after that big resurgence of energy and skill. Another example of terminal lucidity was a lady in memory care who had been mostly sleeping for days in her room on her own. She had been pretty disoriented to other people around her for days. And then one day she wanted to come back out in the living room with everybody else. And she came out and sat with us. I sat down next to her and she held my hand, looked in my eyes. She wanted to talk about her life. It was very clear that's what she wanted. There weren't any specific stories, and she did not have a lot of words, so she really didn't tell me much in the way of details. But what she kept telling me is, it's the end of the line, but it was a good one. And she just kept repeating that, and then I would affirm back to her, and I would talk to her about what I already knew about her life, what I knew was wonderful about her. But I really, really think this was her moment of being aware of needing to find integrity and self-actualization, and I think that brought her peace so that she'd be ready to accept death. And she did pass away in the next week, and I felt so privileged to happen to be the person that was sitting next to her for that. Sadly, her family, including her husband, had a lot of trouble coming into memory care. So he would come, he'd maybe last half an hour in memory care and have to be gone. So sadly, they missed this moment. Some people credit terminal lucidity to a spiritual gift, maybe from God or whatever other higher power that's beyond our understanding. But there are also some scientists now that have theories about actual changes in the brain waves, maybe bringing that function back temporarily, and that maybe that's connected to other changes in the body as the other organs start shutting down. So whether it's science or spiritual, it's still an amazing experience. and the chance of this beautiful moment of reconnection that we, the survivors of this death experience, can treasure the rest of our lives should be plenty of motivation for us to spend as much time with the person as we can in their last days. Okay, now that I've hopefully convinced you why it's so important and so special to be present with someone who's dying with dementia, let's talk a little bit about healing presence. We'll start with talking about having a healing presence. And I'm guessing that those of you who have worked as death doulas probably know a lot more than me about the ins and outs of this. You've had a lot more practice honing these skills than what I have. So I'm just going to give a quick overview and tell you kind of how it aligns with those psychosocial theories that we were just talking about, and how you can use that healing presence to bring that peace at death for somebody with dementia. But if you are especially a death doula listening to the training today, I encourage you to take some time later, think about how you usually create healing presence with anyone, then think about how dementia symptoms might impact your usual approach, and then take a little time, maybe brainstorm some ideas of how you might adapt your approaches to overcome those dementia-related obstacles. But for now, how does a healing presence contribute to someone with dementia achieving peace at the end of life, according to those theories we talked about earlier with Erickson and Maslow? Well, when you bring a healing presence to someone who's dying, what you're doing is you're bringing empathy and compassion, attentiveness, and non judgmental acceptance of that unique person, which is basically what Carl Rogers said that we should do to create a supportive, person centered relationship. A healing presence also needs to feel peaceful and safe, which means it's meeting Maslow's description of a person's basic physiological and safety needs, those two lower levels of his pyramid. So that gives you the solid base of his pyramid of human needs, which then allows us to go with them towards those higher levels of meeting needs towards self-actualization. And another important piece of a healing presence is setting aside your own distractions so you can really focus on connecting physically, psychologically, spiritually, whatever tool you can use to connect with somebody. So, with someone who has dementia, finding moments of connection can really take a lot of extra focus and effort and some real creativity to get around those obstacles. But that's the goal of the healing presence, is just to find that connection however you can. Okay, so one other aspect that can add to that healing presence, especially for someone with dementia, is the supportive environment. The more comfortable and comforting an environment where they're in the process of dying is really going to meet those physiological comfort needs. It's also going to make them feel safe, both physically and emotionally. And it's going to resolve a lot of those basic needs at the bottom of Maslow's pyramid. We accomplish this, again, like I said before, by managing their pain well, minimizing anything that might stress or startle them, like loud noises, sudden movements, interpersonal conflicts between people around them. Sensory stimulation and sensory soothing actions can comfort people, and that differs person to person. So you have to kind of explore that. And actually, if you come back to our second session, we're going to talk about all of that in a lot more depth. But we also add to our healing presence by honoring that unique individual, both in how we approach them, doing it a way that's comfortable for them, and in the things and how we set up the environment around them. The more their environment matches their personality and preferences, both past preferences and current, the more they're going to feel accepted unconditionally for who they are. And this is one way we're communicating empathy, attentiveness, both of which are crucial to that healing presence. Finally, we also need to remember our own needs. So I'm just going to throw this reminder in here. As we care for others, we need to take time to address our own comforts, especially if we're going to maintain that healing presence over a long period of time. We need to make sure we're meeting our basic needs and make sure we're also comfortable. So you might think about, when you're setting up the space around them, that maybe you'll keep your favorite chair or a blanket or a favorite photograph near their bed that's going to help you stay relaxed and comfortable. Maybe you'll want to play soft music that relaxes you, or use a lotion with a scent that helps calm you, as long as none of these things bother the dying person, of course. You might even think about having someone else there to support you in the space where you're supporting the dying person. And then, of course, finally, breaks. It's always important to keep balance in your day, take care of yourself while you're supporting someone else. So take those breaks without any guilt. Those breaks are going to let you rest, let you handle distractions while you're away from the dying person, so that you'll then be able to focus more and be more attentive and present when you're with them. Breaks also are a time when you can fully express and experience your own emotions without impacting the dying person. And your breaks can also directly benefit that person you're supporting, because they might rest better and need a little quiet when they're alone, especially if there's somebody that was really introverted or treasured quiet time in their day before. They might still treasure that as death is approaching, even if they can't tell you that. Some people might also, and maybe you've seen this if you've worked as a death doula, I believe that some people maybe choose at a subconscious level or emotional level to die when they're alone. I really do think that people with dementia can still feel when it's okay to let go or to not let go of life. And they might even hang on longer than is really good for them, just because you're always there and they don't want to hurt you by going while you're next to them. So I realize that breaks seem difficult to find when you're caring for someone who has needs all night, all day, but this is why it's important to have a care team, both professionals, family, friends, whoever is willing to be on this team in a supportive way. And that's so that you can take turns and have those breaks. And I'm also going to put my plug in here. I don't think I probably have to do this for you, but in case you haven't heard it, hospice benefits are available even in memory care. People can bring a hospice team into memory care from the outside. And hospice workers are excellent care team members, and Medicare pays for it. So why not have that extra respite and support for everybody? One way that creating that healing presence is probably different for someone with dementia than what you're used to doing with other people is that you might actually do more active leading. Before you're able to witness what they need to share, you might have to help them in the right directions. My guess is that as you've learned healing presence in other trainings, you've probably learned to do a lot of effective listening. And when um, you're really doing that, just trying to be present to give that dying person the opportunity to express whatever they need to express as they work through finding integrity, finding peace. And so your job focus in healing presence with other people has probably been really a witness more than anything else. Witnessing just so you can affirm their value as a unique, special person and help them validate everything that they've done in their life that's important to them. But with somebody who has dementia, especially severe dementia towards the end, they're going to have pretty limited ability to speak. They're going to have trouble recalling people and events from their life. So you might need to help them connect to their own life story. And you can do that by leading them through reminiscence processes. Since their memory is impaired, you definitely do not want to quiz them. Don't ask them question after question about their life. That's only going to increase the stress. What you want to do instead is maybe repeat stories to them about their life. You might use photographs that are available to show them and help them kind of re-experience some of the things that they did. Or you might also want to use a little trial and error in interpreting what they're trying to express to you. So they may try to say something and it may not make very much sense, but you can reflect back what you think they're saying and then kind of watch their reaction to see if you got that right. Watch their facial expressions, their eyes, pay attention to the tone of their voice, watch their body. Does it tense up or does it look relaxed and peaceful? And if whatever you reflected back to them didn't bring them peace, then try again a different direction. And as you do that with trial and error, you'll probably get an idea of what they're trying to say at least a little bit, and they'll feel heard. If you can't figure out at all what they're specifically expressing, then just respond with affirming but very vague reactions, like a smile, a squeeze of the hand, a nod, a very simple positive affirmation word. Mirror their expressions, mirror their tone, mirror their emotional level. And doing all of that, just that back and forth, will help them feel heard and understood and might bring them peace, even if you didn't fully understand what they were telling you. Another way of helping the person find peace with their life is by welcoming and supporting their visitors. And this is really important, especially if you're a death doula, huge part of your role with someone with dementia. Even if it's another care professional who's coming in and spending time with them, it might be a caregiver in memory care, might be some kind of a medical professional, might be someone that doesn't have a lot of dementia training. So don't assume just because they are a professional that they already know how to handle connecting with someone with dementia or someone dying. Unfortunately, a lot of professionals have very, very little training, even in a memory care setting, as far as how to interact with someone who's dying or someone with severe dementia. So you can help them out by modeling engagement, by demonstrating by your own interaction with the person in front of them that connection really is possible, even despite dementia-related obstacles. You can also help them start their connection with the person by assisting them in getting the person's attention, helping them maybe as a communication bridge, by getting the conversation going between them based on what you know about the person and based on what you know about how they interact. You might even coach the visitor about what they should talk about. And you can do this directly, but you can also do it indirectly by talking to the visitor and asking them questions about special times they shared with the person or about what was so special about their connection with the person in the past. And as you're leading the visitor through this conversation, you do need to be careful to make sure you're not just talking about the person with dementia, but actually engaging them into the conversation as much as possible, at least attempting to. Um, but you can really show somebody that they can connect and get them past that initial hesitation in their interaction. So modeling is really important. You can also kind of model how to get around specific symptoms by doing it in front of the visitor. Another thing that you might be able to help with is sometimes people with severe dementia have very soft-spoken voice or trouble with pronunciation. And because you've spent more time with that person recently as they're dying, you might be able to interpret what they're saying. So you might even just be kind of an interpreter in the connection with other visitors. Or if the person with dementia gets really disoriented while that visitor's there, it could be that a shadow's being created by light coming in through the window, and maybe they confuse that for somebody standing there. Or their mind might be in a different time period. They might be thinking they're 30 something, not 80 something. And you can help the visitor kind of understand so that they can meet that person where they are rather than trying to reorient them to the reality. You might also just help the person with dementia feel that self-actualization and integrity feeling over and over by repeating to them when you're spending time with them after visitors have left, talking to them, reminiscing about what happened with that visitor. They probably won't remember that the visitor was there or that they had some fantastic special moment, but you can help them continue benefiting from that and those emotions that come with it by reflecting back to them, maybe saying, oh, it was so wonderful to see how much your daughter loves you when she was here earlier. The two of you were doing this, and it was just so beautiful. You might also just repeat more specific affirmations of what was shared that you overheard with visitors. So you might be able to repeat those moments. Okay, so that's the basics of healing presence with someone with dementia. Let's talk a little more specifically about communication, because that is, of course, very key to human connection. It's also often very impaired in severe late-stage dementia. So we need to talk a little more about how to overcome those communication-related obstacles. So let's first define what they are. Late stage dementia can make it difficult for people to distinguish background noise from conversation. So, for that reason, it's really important to keep background noise to a minimum when you're trying to communicate with them. Soothing music's wonderful, can add to a peaceful atmosphere when the person's resting, but I recommend either turning it off or turning the volume way down whenever someone's trying to communicate with them. It's also important to move out of the room if you want to have a side conversation with somebody else or to remind other visitors to do the same. And then also, as far as hearing, if the person still benefits from a hearing aid, then make sure they have it, make sure it's turned on with proper settings when they're trying to communicate with somebody. But keep in mind, some people with very late stage dementia won't benefit from a hearing aid anymore because their brain just can't process the input from it. So for some people, hearing aids will start to hinder their interactions because it's a distraction to their brain. And then even if somebody's ears are actually hearing properly, they can really struggle with comprehending the words throughout all stages of dementia, but especially at the very end stage. Throughout the stages of dementia, it's said that people with dementia often lose 1 out of every 4 words that's spoken to them. So if you think about a typical sentence that has, 8 or 10 words in it, and they're missing 1 of every 4 words, they're missing several words out of every sentence. So you can imagine how hard it is to comprehend. Plus, their brain is processing everything more slowly at that point throughout dementia. So it's really hard for them to keep up with a conversation in general, but even more so in late stage, because by late stage, they're probably failing to really comprehend most of the words that they're hearing. So at this point, less is more. People are going to understand better if we can try to express using just 1 or 2 words to get our point across rather than a whole complicated sentence. And people will understand even more if we use gestures at the same time. So, like if we say, are you thirsty? Do you want a drink? Instead of saying, do you want, just say drink as a question and show them what you do with your hand for a drink. They're going to better understand that. And then, of course, in addition to having trouble understanding what we're saying to them, people with late stage dementia can actually have a lot of trouble producing what they want to express to us, actually speaking. Their voice might get really quiet as their brain starts having trouble managing just facial muscles and air in the lungs and all of that. They also might have more trouble controlling their tongue, their lips, their facial muscles, which might make it hard for them to pronounce words very clearly. And of course, memory problems are going to interfere with them finding the right word at the right time. And so all of these changes in their ability to speak mean that we really need to be extra patient as we listen to them. So try not to interrupt, give really long pauses, give them time to get their thoughts out. But of course, offer help if they really look frustrated or distressed over not getting out what they're trying to say. And as with anybody who's dying, they might also just be really tired and move in and out of sleeping a lot. So this is where we follow their lead by following the pace that they're setting throughout the day. We also may just need to drop a conversation if they drop it partway through. That's okay. And we also need to use our detective hat and watch for clues around them to help understand what they're trying to express to us. The clues might be what's going on in the environment around them. It might also be their facial expression, the look in their eye, the tone of their voice, or what we know about their past and about their life story can also offer clues. So let's cover a couple of tips of how to get around all of that. So like I already said, use fewer words, limit the amount of commotion and noise around them so that they can focus on what you're saying to them. And you can even, if someone's really struggling with even basic communication, you might want to use picture boards that they can point to a picture on the board to tell you what they want. And you can buy these pre-made, or you can create a person-centered one that has the things they usually ask for on it for them to point to. You also should use simple gestures like pointing or, pointing to the body part you're asking about, or showing them a prop like a glass if you're asking if they want a drink. Use a lot of body language, a lot of facial expression. Make sure your facial expression and body language matches what you're trying to communicate, doesn't go against it. and limit your own distractions so you can be focused completely on them. So, of course, set your phone aside. Try not to have a lot of side conversations with other people when you're with them, and try to, as much as possible, put your worries aside so that you can be present and ready to receive what they're trying to say to you, and take breaks, of course. In communicating, slow your pace, pause, ask one thing, wait to figure out the response before you ask another thing, and slow your pace and put pauses not only in your voice as you're talking in conversation, but also in physical movements. Try not to be moving around, doing a lot around them. That can overwhelm them, too much going on. Basically, the more still and patient that you are, the more connection moments you're going to catch. So that's why you do it. Then rhythm and music can bring tons of magic with people with dementia in a way that words no longer do. Even after dementia has damaged the part of their brain that holds vocabulary that they learned in school or over the years of talking to people, the part of the brain, even after they've lost access to vocabulary, the part of the brain that stores things like poems, rhymes, prayers, music might still be accessible because it's stored in a different part of the brain than formal language. So, playing songs that are meaningful to them or reciting prayers or poems that they know can help you reach that person behind those symptoms, even at the latest stage of dementia. You might even try, if you're having trouble communicating something to them, try singing what you're saying. If you put it to a tune, their brain might understand it better. And then, of course, if words fail altogether, revert to communicating through nonverbal expression of emotions. This might be mirroring their emotion facial expressions back to them with matching the tone of voice. It also might be uh, just doing whatever you can to mirror back to reflect understanding. It might also be all eye contact. I think if you have been with anybody who's dying, you've probably experienced this. It's amazing how powerful eye contact can really be. So if you pay attention and really hold somebody's gaze, which can be uncomfortable for humans to do with each other for an extended period of time, but the more you do that, the more you really do connect at kind of a soul emotional level, and the more you can really almost feel what they're feeling, especially if you've taken the time to get to know them as a person, either way in the past or just through talking to their family and learning about them. Okay, I'm going over time a little bit, but bear with me like 5 more minutes. I want to share a story just to prove that point that it's not all about words. There was somebody else in the memory care where I worked who was bedridden his last days. He was very nonverbal, and he was just a few days from his death, it turned out. He used to be the center of all of our conversation in memory care. He was a civic leader earlier in his life, and he always had stories to tell, needed to be the center of the party talking. But he completely lost his ability to verbally communicate in his last days, which was very hard for him. But when I went in just to talk with him, his eyes told me everything I needed to know, that he was glad I was there and that he was listening and hearing and connecting. So, the last communication tip is conversation patterns. We don't always think about this, but it's important with people who have dementia. We use a lot of patterns in daily conversations. One of these is um, the pattern of the back and forth. If you have a conversation with someone, we take turns in our conversations. So even if they say something that makes no logical sense at all, don't ignore it. Ignoring it, dismissing it tells them that you don't care or you don't understand. And they want to know that they're being heard. So if you instead respond in an affirming tone, even if you didn't understand, then pause, let them take another turn in the conversation. That back and forth of just, oh, tone, and then letting them talk again, that back and forth will give them that feeling of connection, and they will feel heard, they will feel affirmed. And that's what really matters, is that they feel loved. That's the message that's going to bring them peace at the end of life. And then the other pattern to watch for is repeated words. Sometimes someone with very end stage dementia will keep saying the same word over and over that makes no sense to the context of what's going on. but to them, it means something entirely different than what we know that word to mean. So if they keep repeating a word that makes no sense, try to look around for those clues around what's happening. See if you can figure out what their meaning of that word is in the moment, because they are probably trying to tell you something that's meaningful to them, important to them, if they're repeating it. So use trial and error to try and figure out what it means. So I realize that I have shared a lot of information. If you remember just one thing out of this whole training, what I really want you to remember is there is hope at the end of life, even for people with dementia to have meaningful connection. There's hope that you might to get to share beautiful moments of joyful, meaningful, deep emotional connection with whoever you're caring for, despite all of the challenges that dementia symptoms can add to the dying process. So, if we take the time to learn how to use our healthy brains to support and interact effectively with the person who has dementia, and if we take the time to just be still, be beside them, then I'm very confident we are going to be rewarded with meaningful moments that we're going to remember for years to come, and that's going to bring them peace. Okay, so next time, to close our session for today, next time we gather in a couple of weeks, we're going to talk on sensory perception and how to go beyond the basics of connection that we talked about today. We talked about the importance, how to overcome dementia symptoms, to have those special moments. But next time, we're going to really talk about how dementia changes sensory perception of all the senses. And we're going to talk about how to utilize the sensory abilities that remain so that they can enjoy their last days as much as possible, to go beyond that connection, try and give them some enriching moments. So thank you very much for being here today and wanting to learn how to support people with dementia, and especially for the amazing work that you're already doing. And I hope now that I'm going to get the opportunity to learn from all of you as we move into discussion. But as we move into discussion, these are a few of the resources that I mentioned as I was talking, and I will try copy and pasting them into the chat as we shift into discussion. But I would love to know at this point, let me end my session here and go back to you.
Thank you, Patty. That
Yeah.
was, I am amazed at your ability to gift us with so much overarching information, the theoretical and conceptual frameworks that really support everything that you share, practices. I mean, I really wish we were all sitting in a room together to really bring to life, through practicing so much of what you've gifted us with this evening. And maybe at some point, for all of us who are in Central Oregon, we can make that a reality.
Yeah,
Um,
I would love that.
yeah. So as Patty said, we have about 15 minutes or so, and this is just really an opportunity to, whether you are trained or working as an end-of-life doula, and maybe you've engaged with somebody with dementia that you have a specific question around. Maybe there's caregivers on here that specifically would love to have Patty's wise insights around something you're specifically sort of navigating with an individual loved one. So feel free to either use the chat box, and or you should have a hand raise option that down there at the bottom of your screen. If you can't figure that out, feel free. We're all mature adults here. You can just come off mute as well and say out loud your question. I do see there's a question from Meg in the chat box about, do you have any tools to assist someone with dementia resolve past issues?
I would say that that has to be really person-centered. So I don't know that there's one tool. Um, I think you're going to have to do a lot of communicating, hopefully having kind of an integrated care team with family or friends. And it's going to involve listening, as I'm sure you do as death doulas regularly, listening to the people around them that are there supporting with you, the stories they're sharing and what they're bringing up as far as what might need resolution. And then, you can try raising conversation or supporting the family member in raising conversation. I think your role, if you're doing it as a death doula, will really just be trying to help whoever is trying to get that resolution to connect, help them around the dementia obstacles, like we just talked about, the communication struggles, all of that. Um, but really, the main focus, as far as from the side of the person dying with dementia, it's all about the feeling in the moment. So sometimes they're not going to be able to resolve whatever the past relationship issue was. But if they can feel like it's okay, like it's resolved, that's what really matters in the moment. So the more you can comfort them, if they're seeming distressed about something that's not resolved, don't tell them it doesn't matter, but tell them maybe what is coming to resolution or why they should have some peace with it, or just comfort them. If you don't have a good answer for resolution of whatever issue they're dealing with, the more you can physically comfort them and emotionally comfort them, the more they're going to feel that it's okay in that moment. And you might be able to redirect also if they're really dwelling on something they can't resolve. Comfort their emotion first and then try and shift their attention to something that's not as distressing. And that's easy to do with dementia because people with dementia struggle to multitask. So if you can validate their emotions and comfort their emotions first, you can probably shift them to something that's more pleasing to them in the moment. I don't know if that answers it exactly, but it's my stab at it.
I see Meg shaking her head yes on the screen. So
Okay,
I think that was what
perfect.
she was looking
Good.
for. I see Patty put the links to the resources that she mentioned on that last slide, and we'll be sure. I apologize, especially for those people who are catching the recording. I thought I hit record. I was doing too many things at the beginning, and I think we missed like the first 5 to 10 minutes. So we will, for those who are on here and those who are listening to this, we'll follow up with sending out the recording as well as the resources that Patty has mentioned here. If you just to kind of have it all in one place, sometimes that's easier for people.
Yeah, I noticed in the chat also that there was a remark about dealing with agitation and violence. That there are better sources than me, but I could certainly talk through an issue if a family was dealing with an issue of this. It really has a lot to do with approach and with emotional comfort again and getting them to redirect. So it kind of always comes back to that with dementia. Um, but as far as dealing with agitation and violence, especially if the agitation's related to things like bathing, eating, some of the daily tasks that you're trying to help them with, a good source is that Teepa Snow organization, Positive Approach to Care. They have really amazing kind of hands-on training as far as caregiving skills to assist somebody in a way that doesn't create conflict, but supports their abilities and their independence as much as possible in those daily activities. So I would refer you to Positive Approach to Care, which is teepasnow.com is where you'll find all that. Or if you just search TEEPA, which is TEEPA, if you search Teepa Snow on YouTube, you will find hundreds of videos that address each caregiving issue. But she's an occupational therapist, so she's really good at that actual interaction guidance. So,
Thanks, Patty. And
but
we'll be sure to
yeah,
send out some of those questions,
okay,
or excuse me, some of those links as well.
that'd be great. And I would love to hear from your perspective too, if you've ever had an experience supporting someone dying with dementia, something that worked really well for you, something that maybe didn't work well, or how you create a healing presence with somebody with dementia. If you have that experience, I'd love to hear your perspectives too.
And while people are thinking about that, Patty, I see there's a question from Christine. How can a doula ask a community of family or visitors to please mind their energy with grace, or can we? Do you find this helpful? I was a deaf, blind educator. I noticed that one's senses are limited, similar to dementia or the last days, weeks of one's life. The energy of a room is ever more felt.
Yeah, I think a little bit of dementia education is the best way to approach it so they don't feel attacked that they're being told they're not interacting properly, but explaining more objectively about how sensory inputs change for somebody in dementia, especially people with dementia through all stages, but especially at the end. Some people can be very overwhelmed easily by their senses and sensory input. Other people need more sensory input, like they're not getting enough of it because their brain isn't interpreting it. So they want more and more touch and more sound around them. But it's different for each person. So if you can figure out that person's preferences, whether they're easily overwhelmed or whether they need more input, and then share what you've learned from interacting with that person and what you've learned from how dementia impacts the senses. If you can kind of just offer information to the family members, that'll lead you into explaining why that energy is so important and how we approach and how we move our body and use our voice, why that's so impactful, even more so for someone with dementia. That way, you're not commenting on what the person's doing wrong, but you are giving them the information they need to realize that. But that is important. And our next session is all about sensory comfort and sensory input. So we'll get more into that next time.
And like you said, Patty, it's really asks us to step into that almost investigator role of really watching, I mean, person-centered care to the utmost when we are being asked to be so present and to watch all of the information that's being put out there that is available to us, and then to puzzle that together in a way to say, for some person, maybe there's that sensory piece is too much. For somebody else, they need more of that in order to feel more grounded,
Yep.
more connective, etc.
Yes, and the more you learn about dementia and how it impacts the brain, the better you're going to understand what clues to look for around you, both in handling agitation or sensory overload or any of that. And if you don't already know, if you are in Oregon, if you provide care in Oregon or live in Oregon, Oregon Care Partners website has so much information about dementia and their free workshops. So I encourage you to go there to learn more too.
There's a question from Angela, or comment question. Supporting someone in memory care has been challenging for me because of a lack of training with the caregivers around end of life. Would love to have strategies on how to communicate with formal caregivers as well as family carers. We need more end of life training for long-term care staff.
Yeah, I could not agree with you more on that. And I've worked in 3 different memory cares in 2 different states. And it's true universally, there's not enough training on handling death. There's not enough training on handling um, challenging dementia situations. And there is not enough outreach to providers like you all, the death doulas, or to hospice. People rarely bring hospice into memory care, which breaks my heart because when they do come in, they make a huge difference in that person's experience. So my best advice is just don't assume that they know how to deal with any of that. A lot of caregivers in memory care, especially post-COVID when they have trouble hiring, are very young. They haven't dealt with death in their life. It's frightening to them. They have all that stigma that anybody else does. Um, and they don't always have tons of dementia training on top of it. So just offer them kind of the same approach as far as dementia education through the moment and through your modeling of how you interact appropriately so that they can learn. Don't assume because they're a professional in the memory care setting that they already know.
Mm. Thank you. And I think it was, it might have been Erin, our director of programming, put in the chat box. We as Peaceful Presence are also really focused on bringing end of life education to long-term care facilities across Oregon. It's definitely a focus for us this year,
Good.
especially in rural communities. And so stay tuned. We're working on developing those relationships and that outreach. And as much as possible, would love to pull Patty into a lot of that education as well.
Mm-hmm.
There was a question I see. I think Alan was trying to raise his hand there. Let me just read one more question here. Patty, have you experienced anybody with an early dementia diagnosis who has raised the question of medical assistance in dying? Essentially, someone who anticipates the trajectory of dementia and wants to look at resources to end their life.
Yeah, that's a huge ethical debate. I mean, you could do a whole session on that. And I have always been really proud that Oregon was so early in death with dignity concepts and laws. But even in Oregon, death with dignity is difficult with dementia because they have to pass that ability to go through the screenings, make sure that they're making the decision at the time that they're taking the lethal prescription. They have to be directing it themselves. They have to make the decision at that point and be capable of that, which most people with severe dementia are not. So theoretically, yes, maybe the death with dignity law in Oregon in particular, someone early in, well, no, I don't even think so. I'm going to back up on that because the challenge, if someone were to think about following Oregon's death with dignity laws in the beginning, earlier, soon after diagnosis, when they have less impact by the dementia and still could pass that screening of making their own decision, at that point, they're really not meeting the definition of terminal in the sense that they're very close to death because they might be 10 years away from death. So I think that it still would be difficult to get that lethal prescription in Oregon. That is an issue. It's a big debate in places like Australia and England, where there's a little more forward thinking about dementia and dementia care and continuing to live inclusively in the broader community with dementia. Those countries have a lot of people advocating who actually have dementia diagnoses, and they are talking to the government, trying to get things changed. What a lot of them are moving towards is and I always forget the abbreviation, but the right to end drinking and eating, to stop drinking and
Voluntary,
eating. Yeah.
voluntary stopping eating and drinking, V said. Yes.
Yeah. So that's kind of the current talk for people that are wanting the right to die with dementia. I have mixed feelings, and I could go into a huge debate, which I won't, because my approach with the Montessori approach to dementia support is I strongly believe people can live well with dementia. So I hate for them to give up 2 to 5 years, maybe more, when they could be enjoying life with their family even after their dementia diagnosis by choosing to end life with dignity soon after diagnosis. There is, of course, the option in Switzerland. You can do it for almost any reason, so you could do that. But there is one website to mention, and I think it's Compassionate Choices. You might know it, Elizabeth. I'd have to double check. Or Compassion and Choices, something like that. And I can send it to you, Elizabeth, if you're going to send the recording out. I'll send you that website. But it has a chart for all 50 states that talk about what all the laws are for just death with dignity in general. So you could kind of browse the laws that way too to see how they'd fit with dementia.
Yeah, great. And then there is a organization here in the Pacific Northwest, VSED Resources, .org, that also has a lot of information on individuals who are navigating a variety of different serious or chronic or terminal illnesses and what engaging VSED might look like. And then I think, Patty, as you mentioned earlier, the presence or lack thereof of advanced care planning for individuals upstream. And I think most of you for those of you who've trained with us as end of life doulas, the using the dementia advanced directive or other tools to really articulate preferences early on is helpful as people progress in this illness to make sure we're getting them goal concordant support and care in line with their personal issues, or excuse me,
And
personal
that's
preferences.
Yeah, and that's a huge part of what I do in my business is doing there's 4 or 5 at least advanced directives that are specific to dementia needs. So I will help people through those dementia specific directives as well as the Oregon medical directive. And I also do a little bit of talking about life goals, helping them adapt their life goals to fit with their dementia diagnosis so they can find other purposeful, meaningful ways of living after diagnosis. So we kind of go both directions, plan for
Okay.
while they're still alive and plan for their death. And I see that someone from Peaceful Presence put Compassion and Choices website on here. That is the one I was referring to. So.
And we'll be sure to grab all of the resources that have been listed here in the chat box and make sure that this comes to you in one email with the recordings. We have 2 minutes or so. I think, was it you who's trying to raise your hand and say something? I'll ask you to unmute there if you want to.
Thank you, Elizabeth, and thanks for the evening. Um, I'm a lay person, and I was a caregiver for my wife who had dementia for a little over 10 years, and she died about 3 years ago as a result of that disease. And I found for me, in order to be able to communicate with her in a meaningful way, I ended up taking a couple of improv classes because I found that she would put a question to me and I would be left footed and I would respond in an inappropriate way. So by
Mhm.
going to an improv class, it gave me some tools that let me think a moment before I spoke. And I found that overall I was more appropriate with her as her disease progressed. So I just, for me, I think it was just, it really landed a gift for me and with her care because it was getting very tense in the house. And most of it had to do with me not fully understanding what her journey was like. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I would say the Teepa Snow trainings get into that too. She does a lot of talking about how behaviors come from how we approach or how we react to something. That also, what plays into the improv idea is being present in the moment, trying to let go of what's happened between you and your past in your relationship, trying to let go of expectations of what you think the person you used to know would do in response to your actions, and instead engage them where they are now. That's true throughout dementia progression, that's really helpful. There's actually a book called My Two Elaines, written by the former governor of Wisconsin. And it's a beautiful little short book where he explains had to learn to pivot, that there were different Elaines. She kept changing and evolving, and he was a better caregiver the more he could pivot to how she was changing. So yeah, thank you, Alan.
Katie actually put in the chat box, there's a TED Talk using improv to improve life with Alzheimer's. So we'll be sure to share all those resources as well. Um, well, we are at time. We packed a lot into an hour and a half. And as Patty said, and as you all hopefully know, this is part one of a two-part workshop series. There was so much content that we decided we were going to do it over two separate trainings. So the next one will be on Thursday, March 6th at the same time at 5 o'clock. It's the same exact Zoom link that you used for this evening's training. And we hope to see you all here. I know some people registered and are catching the training, but if you are able to be here in person, it just allows for a richer experience for all of us. It feels like we're here together as a community. And I think the comments and the resources in the chat box and the questions just help to bring the material alive in a different way. So we hope that we will see you in 2 weeks. And again, Patty, thank you for your willingness just to share your dedication to supporting community members in this way and bringing alive this really important information to our learning community. So thank you so
Well,
much.
yeah, thank you for the opportunity. I'm so happy to work with you and happy to have you in our community in Central Oregon. So thanks to all of you.
Thank you. Good night, everyone.